Each NSSA Saferoom producer must have a quality assurance plan. The Saferoom design must be performed by a registered engineer according to NSSA ICC 500, FEMA 320, and FEMA 361. An installation checklist is developed by the Saferoom manufacturer and the design engineer of record. Once these design steps are complete, both the shelter design and the installation checklist must be reviewed and affirmed by an approved third-party engineer. The third-party engineer must submit their qualifications demonstrating their knowledge of the components of Saferoom design to become approved by the NSSA Board of Directors prior to completing this work. This installation video was prepared to demonstrate the steps used by NSSA producer and installer members to ensure that the Saferooms are properly installed.
Part of the process here for an NSSA quality assurance plan is to document the process and procedure for installing the shelter to give people assurance that the shelter was properly installed. I have a list here that's part of that checklist for the installation process, and we'll just kind of go through that here. I met with the customer last night. They had some things come up with their family that they weren't going to be able to be here today. So we already discussed the fact that if a permit was required, they would obtain it, and he said a permit was not required. The next was check to see if the shelter is not going to be set in a floodplain, and he assured me that this is not in a floodplain. The next was to confirm the shelter is not being set over any utility lines and at least 3 foot from the property line. He agreed with that. Normally, if this shelter was going to be put onto an existing concrete slab, we would need to confirm the thickness was at least 3 inches. This is going on a precast pad, so the thickness is 6 inches. The next was to confirm the compressive strength of the concrete was at least 1500 psi. This one was a precast pad, so it's about 5000 psi plus. If the slab was cast in place, we'd confirm that the slab was continuous and free of cracks or defects. So we're okay with that since it's a precast pad and it's new. Confirm the slab is reasonably level, not at level over a ½ inch per foot. This slab may slope a little bit with the ground terrain here, but we do know that the slab will mate with the shelter, so we won't have any excessive thickness on the epoxy. I discussed the installation process with the customer last night since he wasn't going to be here, and discussed the damage waiver. The damage waiver is something that we use as an NSSA member to communicate the possible damage that can occur to their property when we bring a large truck in to set a shelter of this weight, that it might leave ruts and could cause damage to a driveway, and he was in agreement with that. The first thing that we do when we come in is we examine the area for the shelter to be set, and this area here is going to require a little bit of groundwork to be able to get the pad within reason for being level. We did confirm that the shelter doesn't block anything and provides adequate room for ventilation. We confirmed that the door will swing and it won't create a hazard, being that this is out in the open. That works out fine. So once we've had the shelter pad set, then we'll continue with the rest of this checklist. What they're doing now is they're setting the pad down without continuous support to determine what it's going to take to make it level. Then they'll continue to place fill material underneath the pad, so it will set on a level foundation. They'll move the pad out of the way now while we move rock into the proper location. Normally when we come to a site, we are able to discuss this with the customer prior to us coming out. Normally the customer will have it properly prepared. It'll take a little bit of time this morning to get the rock and everything in place to make sure the slab is uniformly supported. It'll be a few minutes while the guys hand move some aggregate to make sure that the base is properly supported. So right now he's working on getting things ready to scarify the surface of the concrete to improve the bond between the epoxy bond between the shelter and the base slab. So he's putting a few marks for some reference to run the scarifier to.
Once the concrete surface has been scarified, a broom and other means are used to clean the surface before placing epoxy. The shelter is set dry onto the base slab to confirm the sections fit and mate correctly. Here we see the placing of mixed epoxy onto the concrete slab, which has previously been scarified. The scarifying improves the bond between the epoxy and the concrete. The shelter is now being aligned to be set into the epoxy on the precast slab. Here we see the hinges and moving parts of the shelter door are being greased.
Okay, so the epoxy's been placed, the shelter's been placed on top of the epoxy. Grease the door hinges, the center mechanism sleeve. Confirm the lift-off safety feature of the door works. Install the locking clip. Install the NSSA seal. Made sure the T-handle was secure. The door closes and properly aligned. Confirm the bolts securing the door frame to the shelter are tight. Cleaning up the debris, no touch-up paint required, taking GPS readings. Mark will go through the hazard communication sheet with the customer and we'll finish our paperwork. So that gets our checklist for the installation process and he'll go through his paperwork check with the customer.
All right, this is a 5363 above ground storm shelter. We used epoxy to epoxy it to the pad. These are your terms and conditions of the warranty and the sale of this storm shelter. This is the hazardous warning sheet. This tells you about how heavy the door is and how the door works. This is your certificate of installation. This is a VCP 305363 above ground storm shelter. It's usually best to tell somebody in the next town or a friend of yours that you're actually getting into the storm shelter, so that way in case anything happens you can call them and they can notify somebody also. Okay, if you can see, our NSSA tag is located up in the upper right hand corner of this door here. That shows you that this is a certified storm shelter and it meets all the requirements of the National Storm Shelter Association. You want to clip this closed so that way the door won't open up in case of severe winds. So we can go inside right now and I'll show you how it works. This handle closes easily every time, that way that the door is secured. You can see that the penetrations through the corners, through the metal frame, that way it keeps the door closed. Now in case something happens, that something falls in front of the door and you can't swing it out, just open up the door, put the door skid bar underneath, and you step on it. Now with less than 50 pounds, you can see that the door will come off the hinges. and what happens, it'll fall away and you can tip it away. That way you can still get out, so you're not trapped in your storm shelter.
The Saferoom installation is now complete. The installer ensures that the customer is familiar with all features of the Saferoom and is notified that they will receive an original copy of the installation certificate, installation checklist, and invoice in the mail. This documented process was developed to assure all parties involved that the Saferoom is properly installed every time.